Robert was a curious boy growing up in Hawaii. He had two important people in his life who taught him about money. The first was his real father, whom he called Poor Dad. Poor Dad was a schoolteacher. He believed in studying hard, getting good grades, and finding a secure job. He worked very hard to provide for his family, but they often struggled to make ends meet. The second was the father of Robert's best friend, Mike. This man was wealthy and owned many businesses. Robert called him Rich Dad. Rich Dad believed that being smart with money was more important than having a high-paying job. He taught Robert and Mike lessons about wealth and how to make money work for them. One day, Robert asked his poor dad, "Why don't we have money like Mike's family?" Poor Dad sighed and said, "Because I work for my money, Robert. People like Mike's dad own businesses. They don't work for money. They make their money work for them." This answer didn't fully satisfy Robert, so he went to Rich Dad to ask the same question. Rich Dad smiled and said, "I can teach you how to be wealthy, but it will take time and effort. Are you willing to learn?" Robert and Mike both nodded eagerly. The next morning, Rich Dad gave them their first job, working at one of his small stores. The job didn't pay much, but that wasn't the point. Rich Dad wanted them to learn the value of hard work and observation. "You won't get rich by just working," Rich Dad explained. "You need to learn how money works and how to make it grow." At first, the boys were confused. They didn't understand what Rich Dad meant. But over time, as they watched the customers, the store operations, and the way money flowed in and out, they began to see what Rich Dad was teaching. "Most people work hard to earn money," Rich Dad said one day. "But wealthy people make money work for them. They buy assets, things that bring in money like businesses, real estate, or stocks. Poor people spend their money on liabilities, things that take money away like expensive cars or fancy clothes." Robert was amazed. He realized that this was the biggest difference between his two dads. Poor Dad believed in working hard for a paycheck, while Rich Dad believed in creating wealth by investing in assets. "Start young," Rich Dad advised. "The earlier you begin, the more you can grow your wealth." Robert and Mike continued working at the small store, but their lessons with Rich Dad didn't end there. One Saturday morning, Rich Dad called the boys to his office. On the desk were 2 stacks of money. "Tell me," Rich Dad said, pointing to the first stack, "what would you do if I gave you this?" The boys looked at the money. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was more than they had ever seen at one time. "I'd buy a new bike," Mike exclaimed. "I'd get some comic books," Robert added. Rich Dad laughed. "That's what most people would do. They'd spend it. But what if I told you to use this money to make more money? What would you do then?" The boys were puzzled. "How do we make money with money?" Robert asked. "That's the key to wealth," Rich Dad said. "Invest it. When you buy something like a bike or a comic book, the money is gone. But when you invest in an asset, that asset can bring you more money over time." Rich Dad then explained the difference between assets and liabilities. He used simple examples to make it clear. "Imagine you buy a small house," he said. "If you rent it out, the rent money you earn every month is more than what you spend on the house. That's an asset. Now imagine you buy a fancy car. Every month you have to pay for gas, insurance, and maintenance. That's a liability. It takes money out of your pocket instead of putting money in." Robert thought about his poor dad. His father worked very hard, but most of his paycheck went toward paying bills and buying things they needed or wanted. There was never anything left to invest in assets. Rich Dad continued, "Many people think they'll become rich if they just get a higher-paying job. But the truth is, if you don't understand how to manage money, you'll always be poor, no matter how much you earn. It's not about how much you make. It's about how much you keep and grow." The boys nodded, beginning to understand. Rich Dad then gave them their next task. "I want you to think of one small business you can start," he said. "It doesn't have to be big or perfect. It's about learning how money works." Robert and Mike spent the next few days brainstorming. Finally, they decided to start a small service washing cars in their neighborhood. They borrowed a bucket and sponges from Rich Dad and spent their weekends cleaning cars. At first, it was hard work and they didn't earn much. But soon, they came up with a new idea: hiring younger kids to help. They paid the kids a small amount to do the cleaning while they focused on getting more customers. "See what you've done?" Rich Dad said proudly when he saw their growing business. "You've learned to create a system. Now your money is working for you, not the other way around." This was a powerful lesson for Robert. He realized that being rich wasn't about luck or working harder than everyone else. It was about thinking differently and making smart choices. As the car washing business grew, Robert and Mike started earning more money than they had ever imagined. They didn't spend it on toys or treats as they might have done before. Instead, they followed Rich Dad's advice: reinvest the money. Rich Dad called them into his office again. "You've done well so far," he said. "Now let me teach you about a term that will make you wealthy: financial literacy." Robert raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" "It means understanding how money works," Rich Dad explained. "Most people don't learn this in school. They learn to work for money, but not how to make money work for them." Rich Dad then drew a diagram on a piece of paper. It was a simple square divided into 4 parts: employee, self-employed, business owner, investor. "This is called the cash flow quadrant," he said. "Most people spend their lives in the first 2 parts, employee and self-employed. They work hard for their money, but they're trading time for dollars. If they stop working, the money stops coming in." The boys nodded, remembering how their fathers worked long hours every day. "But the other 2 parts, business owner and investor, are different," Rich Dad continued. "Here, you let your money work for you. As a business owner, you create systems that earn money even when you're not there. As an investor, you put your money into assets that grow over time." Robert thought about their car washing business. They had created a system by hiring other kids to do the cleaning, and they were already seeing how it freed up their time to find more customers. "Why doesn't everyone do this?" Mike asked. Rich Dad smiled. "Fear and ignorance. Most people are afraid of taking risks, and they don't take the time to learn about money. They stay in their comfort zones, working as employees or being self-employed. But those who take the time to understand the rules of money can move into the other parts of the quadrant." Robert felt a spark of excitement. He wanted to learn more. He wanted to be in the business owner and investor parts of the quadrant, just like Rich Dad. Rich Dad then taught the boys about budgeting. He showed them how to divide their income into categories. Savings? This is for emergencies or future opportunities, Rich Dad said. Investments? This money should go into assets that grow. Expenses. Only spend what you need to live. Fun. It's okay to enjoy your money, but don't overspend. The boys practiced these lessons with their car washing earnings. They saved a portion, invested some in their business, and set aside a little for fun. One day, Robert asked Rich Dad, "What happens if we lose our money in an investment?" Rich Dad nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good question. Losing money is part of the learning process. The important thing is to learn from your mistakes. Wealthy people don't let fear of failure stop them. They take calculated risks, and they grow from every experience." Rich Dad then shared a personal story. "When I was younger, I invested in a piece of land, thinking I'd make a big profit. But I didn't do enough research, and the land turned out to be worthless. I lost a lot of money, but I also learned an important lesson. Always do your homework before you invest." Robert appreciated Rich Dad's honesty. It made him realize that even successful people made mistakes, but they didn't let those mistakes define them. As the weeks passed, Robert and Mike continued to grow their business. They started thinking about new opportunities. What if they expanded into another service? What if they reinvested their earnings into a completely new business? Rich Dad encouraged their curiosity. "The world is full of opportunities," he said. "But to seize them, you need to be prepared. Keep learning, keep growing, and always stay open to new ideas." Robert and Mike's car washing business had become a great success. They were earning steady income, reinvesting it wisely, and learning lessons about money that most adults didn't know. But Rich Dad wasn't finished teaching them. He had one more vital lesson to share. "You've done well," he told the boys one afternoon. "But now, I want you to understand the difference between assets and liabilities." Robert had heard these words before but wasn't entirely sure what they meant. "What's the difference?" he asked. Rich Dad grabbed a piece of paper and drew two columns. On the left, he wrote assets. On the right, he wrote liabilities. "An asset," he explained, "is something that puts money into your pocket. A liability is something that takes money out of your pocket." Rich Dad then gave examples. Assets: a rental property that earns income, stocks that pay dividends, a business that runs without you. Liabilities: a car loan, credit card debt, or even a house if it doesn't generate income. "But a house is valuable, isn't it?" Mike asked. "It can be," Rich Dad said, "but not always. Most people think of their home as an asset, but if they're paying a mortgage and maintenance costs without earning any income from it, then it's a liability. An asset works for you. A liability costs you." This concept was a game changer for the boys. They began to see money differently. They realized that if they wanted to become wealthy, they needed to focus on acquiring assets and minimizing liabilities. Rich Dad gave them an assignment. "I want you to identify one asset you could start building today." The boys thought about their car washing business. It was already an asset because it generated income. But how could they build more assets? After brainstorming, they decided to expand their services. They added a lawn mowing service to their business. They used their car washing profits to buy a lawnmower and hired other kids to do the work. Soon, they had two sources of income working for them. Rich Dad was impressed. "Now you're thinking like entrepreneurs," he said. "This is how wealth is built. Not by working harder, but by making your money work for you." The boys also started keeping a simple ledger, just like Rich Dad had shown them. They tracked every dollar they earned and spent. They labeled their expenses as liabilities and their earnings as assets. This helped them see exactly where their money was going and how they could improve. One day, Rich Dad introduced them to another concept: passive income. Passive income is the key to financial freedom, he said. It's money that comes in without you having to work for it every day. Your car washing and lawn mowing businesses are examples of passive income because other people are doing the work while you earn money. Rich Dad explained that passive income could come from various sources: rental properties, stocks, businesses, or even royalties from creative works like books or music. The important thing was to build multiple streams of passive income so they wouldn't have to rely on a single source. Robert asked, "What happens if we don't build passive income?" "You'll be like most people," Rich Dad replied. "You'll work hard your entire life, trading your time for money. And when you stop working, the money stops too. But if you focus on building passive income, you can live comfortably, even when you're not working." The boys were inspired. They began to think about their future. What kind of lives did they want to build? How could they create enough assets and passive income to achieve financial freedom? Rich Dad encouraged them to dream big. "Wealth isn't just about money," he said. "It's about freedom. The freedom to live life on your terms, to spend time with your family, to pursue your passions, and to make a difference in the world." Robert and Mike realized that they had learned more from Rich Dad than they ever could have imagined. They weren't just learning about money, they were learning about life. Years later, Robert would look back on these lessons as the foundation of his success. He would go on to share Rich Dad's teachings with millions of people around the world, helping them to understand money and build wealth. But at that moment, standing in Rich Dad's office, Robert and Mike were simply two boys with big dreams and a thirst for knowledge. Rich Dad smiled at them and said, "Remember, wealth is built one step at a time. Stay curious, stay disciplined, and always focus on building your assets. If you do that, you'll never have to worry about money again." The boys left the office with a renewed sense of purpose. They knew that their journey to wealth had just begun, but they were ready for the challenge. With Rich Dad's guidance, they were confident they could achieve anything they set their minds to.